Okay, this is a brief presentation on academic comparisons. How do you compare two things in academic writing? Well, you might have heard the saying, it's like comparing apples and oranges. And of course, that's impossible. How do you compare these two very different things? They're fruit, but which is best? Right? So you could say subjectively, I like oranges best, or I like apples best. But that's just your viewpoint. It's not a comparison. And when we're doing academic writing, we've got to solve a similar problem to evaluate two or more different arguments or theories or approaches. Now, one way of comparing two things is comparing the properties they share. So, for example, if you're packing your bag and you want to minimize your weight, you'll look at an apple or an orange and find out which is the lighter one, right? Because you're choosing the lightest on the basis that they've got a common property. That's a way of comparing apples and oranges. They've both got weight. Another might be, for example, how thirst quenching they are. If you think it's going to be a hot day, you might choose an orange even though it's heavier. So it's a common property that allows you to make a comparison which is not just subjective, it's through common properties. And this essentially is what we're doing when we're doing an analysis. We're bringing out properties like what's the problem, what's the solution, etc. And these academic comparisons use a similar trick. Of course, you're not dealing with physical properties, you're dealing with abstract properties or concepts. So two arguments can be understood in relation to one another through how they understand or deal with common abstract ideas or theories. So, take politics. If you look at politics, one of the most common political arguments is a view of the state, of the machinery of government. So if you take out the two views of the state that are found in two arguments, you can then compare the two arguments in this way. So you're using the concept of the state, which as a common property, to get the two arguments to interact with each other. Like apples and oranges uses weight, we're using the concept of the state for two properties. And that allows you to move beyond your first impression or feeling about the argument. We can take literature, right? We can look at what the Marxist view is or feminist view. That's again different views of social groups. We can do that. And we might bring out the strengths and weaknesses of two theories in their ability to explain if we're comparing theories, right? Now, currently in UK education, the common practice is to say this has got a list of positives and negatives, but that's not good enough for us. It's not simply black and white. We want to make a proper comparison. So, to put two arguments in a relationship to each other, we need to bring out the underlying meaning, right? To do that, it's not whether we like one or not. It's using abstract concepts, right, and how they connect. So let's look at a worked example. Right, so this is our sort of introduction. These are two arguments about the regulation of the media based around a discussion of page 3. Page 3 is a page featuring a topless model in the popular Sun newspaper that actually stopped quite a long time ago. So the first piece we're looking at is a summary of an argument by Eswick in The Independent, and the second is an article by Shiner from the online magazine Spiked. After the summaries, there's an attempt to compare the two arguments, and to do this we make a comparison of both writers' understanding of the state and of civil society. And also to make the comparison requires explaining how the writers understand the public sphere and the media, the public and the media. So hopefully this comparison illustrates how we can use theories to give insights into writing. So here we go. Eswick argues that this is the actual write-up. Eswick argues that the portrayal of women in the press is a, quote, form of discrimination. Endemic sexist reporting undermines women's self-esteem thus limiting women's participation in the public sphere, and encourages men to see women as unequal, potentially leading to violence against women. So we have from endemic sexist reporting to the violence against women. So rather than being a question of taste or decency, on which people might have different views, for Heeswijk this is discrimination in action, and so a question of equality. To stop the discrimination which comes from sexist reporting, negative stereotypes, and the portrayal of women based on looks, requires the regulation of the media for Heeswijk. Heeswijk suggests that newspapers which portray women as sex objects should be made more difficult to obtain. And how should this happen? By removing them from ready access in newsagents and by stopping sales to minors. She also argues that the Leveson inquiry onto press standards should tackle the reporting of rape and the portrayal of women more generally through having such reports scrutinised for signs of sexism by future regulators. Heeswijk makes pains to argue that, quote, this is not about censorship, rather it is about getting a press that, quote, serves the public interest and, quote, at the very least does no harm. So our second article. Shiner objects to groups such as Turn Your Back on Page 3, campaigning against Page 3 and the sexist portrayal of women in the press. She argues that they're falsely portraying themselves as representatives of women as a means to try to force their views on the public by calling for the regulation of the press. Rather than countering the negative portrayal of women, Shiner sees such campaigns themselves as presenting women as weak, pathetic and powerless, and needing, quote, paternalistic censorship by regulators to sort out sexism and protect them. Likewise, Shiner objects to the view of men by such groups as uncontrollable beasts, merely reacting to female flesh. Any combating of discrimination, rather than being the, quote, government's responsibility, for Shiner must come from society. And the explanation of society is it's a question of politics and culture rather than regulation from above by the state. Ultimately, Shiner sees no problem in women being photographed naked. Rather, the problem is the attempt to curtail freedom, even to the extent of not trusting women to judge for themselves what jobs they might want to take and how they might want to express their sexuality. So, final section is the comparison. The two authors differ strongly in how they see both the state and civil society. Heeswijk follows the media effects school in directly linking media portrayals to psychological attitudes, self-esteem in women and sexist attitudes in men. In reading public viewpoints from media representation, she sees the public sphere, the press, the media, etc., as the location of problems, of discrimination, and downplays the ability of individuals to act for themselves or collectively through civil society groups orientated towards the public to counter such discrimination. In discounting the public, she sees it as the role of enlightened groups to call on the state to regulate public life and especially the media, especially regulate the media, as powerful and destructive private interests. In this view, the state sits above society and is the only powerful actor not captured by media concerns, and so able to play a progressive role. Shiner, by contrast, prioritises freedom of expression, both for those who might want to be glamour models and for those who might want to campaign for equality through public engagement, such as women who might want to speak up and prove the illegitimacy of sexist attitudes by themselves, right, in quotes. This unconstrained public can then become both the place where individuals express the interests and concerns they have, but also find others and act with them in civil society groups to try to further their interests, often by influencing the public, i.e. for Shiner's society. The media here is less important in the sense that it itself does not determine the public's consciousness, but also more important as a key site where public discussions take place and where civil society groups might want to communicate their interests. Where the state limits freedom of expression, this impoverishes the public sphere and with it civil society. State regulation to enforce particular moral standards or political viewpoints is understood by China as an elite imposition on the public, which undermines and demobilises the activities of civil society, but also, in the end, fails to address any underlying problems. So, as we've seen from this, in our comparison, we've got different views on the state and civil society and the individual. And this allows us to make a comparison by laying out how the two different authors see it. So thank you very much.